legalizefreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Listen without limits. Unchain your brain. Change your thinking. Change your life. legalizefreedom.com.
Greetings and welcome once again to legalizefreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffat, and my guest today is Richard Kretz, who joins us to discuss his book, The Alchemical Search for the Unified Field, Pythagorean, Hermetic and Shamanic Journeys into Invisible and Ethereal Realms. Topics discussed include cosmic consciousness, also known as God, and the source of all that is, the deceptive dimensions of time, space and physical reality, Freemasonry and other fraternities and the quest for lost knowledge, symbolism, sacred geometry and the true power of architecture, and alchemy, science and the nature of the Philosopher's Stone. Hello and welcome, Richard, and thank you so much for joining us today on legalizefreedom.com.
Well, thank you, Greg. I'm looking forward to our discussion this afternoon.
Richard, today we're going to be talking about, or having a chat inspired by, your book. It's just come out, entitled The Alchemical Search for the Unified Field, Pythagorean, Hermetic and Shamanic Journeys into Invisible and Ethereal Realms. It's quite a title. Before we dive into that, just give listeners a little bit of information about your background and your work in general.
Okay. As far as my background, I've been dealing with the esoteric most of my life. It's a family kind of thing. I've been a Mason, a Rosicrucian, involved in a lot of these, esoteric societies. So I've also acquired a lot of knowledge in that regard. I've practiced transcendental meditation since, the early 70s. So it's been quite a while. And I've spent 3 years up on a mountain with a shaman, which was quite entertaining, I'll say that, and very influential as far as, the impact it's had on my life.
Now, as far as I can see, this is your first book. Is that correct? And if so, kind of what was the driving force behind publishing this? You, as you say, you've had so many decades of experience with these things, but yet only now you're coming to putting it into book form.
Right. And, that's a very good question, Greg. So, what was the inspiration? Well, one of the things I enjoy doing is I ask questions, and I don't like to ask easy questions. I'll ask a hard question that makes folks uncomfortable, because there are things folks are reluctant to discuss because they don't have the answers to them. And so, they'll kind of try to divert you to someplace else. But with regard to the reason for it, when I became a Mason 20 years ago, it was a wonderful experience as far as the initiation and things. And I was all excited about it. But the experience left me asking many, many questions. And when I was asking my brothers, say, what does this mean or what does that mean? They really didn't know, but they weren't brave enough to say, well, I don't know. They tried to give me a song and dance, using biblical passages or existential philosophical ideas, but there was nothing that really provided a substantive answer that seemed to make any sense. So I ended up, going out on this, what I'll call a quixotic quest, with the hope I wouldn't be chasing windmills, trying to find answers with regard to, okay, well, what's, this whole Masonic thing about, and how does that fit into the broader scheme of things of what I learned as a shaman and with the, Eastern mysticism idea or Vedic science uh, from India, and how does that also, embrace the Western idea of alchemy or the occultism? How do these things all work together? So, I had these questions and, I was on the search for answers. And over the years, I acquired a great deal of knowledge. But I also found that if I had these questions, you must be having these questions too, even if you're not asking them. So at that point, I felt if I had these questions, I had an obligation to pose them in an open forum. And if I had the answers to them, provide them. So, they're supposed to be thought provoking, to get folks to think, and expand their sense of awareness. And that's really what the driving force, the inspiration of doing this first book is all about.
Well, we'll get to Freemasonry in a short while. Looking at, once again at the title of the book, there's a lot of sort of themes or sort of areas, shall we say, in there. Alchemy, Hermeticism, shamanism. The book, I found it interesting in its structure and how it kind of functioned. It's kind of almost like an initiatory experience in itself, and I'm sure this was part of your intention. And if someone said to me, "Oh, okay, so what's this book about?" It's not really what it's about; it's what it is. If you see what I mean, what the book is. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, the distinction between those two things.
It makes a great deal of sense. And it's kind of difficult to address it in that, okay, the book is about this, that, or something else. Um, the book simply is. The book actually embraces, it encompasses what the Philosopher's Stone is really all about. And folks will look at that title and, it's a very lofty title. And when they see words like alchemy, the unified field, and then, meditation, these can be scary words that folks aren't really familiar with. So, if I was going to say, okay, well, what's the real message of the book? Well, without getting real technical, it comes across as it's meditation and all this kind of stuff, they're fancy ways of discussing our relationship with a supreme being, deity, God, however whatever moniker you would like to use. But it's a process of improving our communication within ourselves and with God, for example, so that we are able to attain a higher level of consciousness and be better than we once were. So, if you're looking at the book, that's all brought together in the third section of it that is referred to as the candle. And a candle, of course, provides enlightenment. And in my case, Charles was the candle. He provided light or enlightened me. Um, he showed me the way of how to be better than I once was through a variety of life experiences, vision quests, if you will.
Charles, in case people are wondering, is the shaman that you spent all that time on the mountain with. Some of the things that I have in front of me in my sort of notebook are not so much questions, but kind of propositions or just ideas. I mean, just, collections of words that stayed with me after reading the book, and maybe they can lead us into some of this in a deeper manner. One of the first things that I wrote down when I started to go through the book was simply the statement, "God is real."
Well, I think that's an interesting question, and it's a very good one. It's one that I would ask, as a matter of fact, and have asked. So it really boils down to the question of who or what is God. Um, to be honest with you, I don't really have a single answer for that. My perception, my thoughts about God, about a deity, we can assign whatever name we want to it, but ultimately it's something, or we can say someone that is greater than we are, someone or something that is omniscient, omnipotent, um, that you know we have to look up to, and we're not able to visually see him necessarily, you know, but yet we somehow experience that presence. He's omnipresent, and with that in mind, we have to believe in something. It seems to be that having a belief is an inherent necessity within us. Um, so, in order to believe in something that is an intangible, that we can't see, requires faith, and faith has a number of definitions, but faith basically is believing in the abstract, believing in something that we can't touch, feel, or see, but there's something that resides within us that suggests that it's part of our reality. It's part of our uh, consciousness, our worldview, our paradigm of life.
Yeah, for me, God, the term, is simply a sort of religious historical term that's been our way as a species of trying to encapsulate all that is, that sense of something greater than ourselves. So if we look at where ancient spiritual traditions meet cutting edge science, then it would be the singular consciousness that is the source of all that is.
Exactly. It's an attempt to rationalize uh, whatever the something is that is greater than us, that we're subservient to, possibly.
Exactly. Another one, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Now, the context in which I noted that down in your book, I don't recall, but that was the second thing I wrote down. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. What immediately springs to mind is the Wizard of Oz, of course, and relate that to the idea of God. Who knows? In the Wizard of Oz, was the man behind the curtain God playing God?
No, that's actually in the book, and I think you've pretty much nailed it. Oftentimes, we have these front men, and they're saying, okay, well, you're supposed to believe this, and you have to do this for whatever reason. You're not allowed to question it, even though that they're subservient, or they have to answer to something that's greater than themselves. And in this case, in the Wizard of Oz, yes, we have the wizard that is hiding behind the curtain, but he's supposed pretending to represent something greater than what he was. So you were absolutely correct in your assessment of what that means. It's pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. In other words, you do what you're supposed to do without question. But that's not really how things work. There is something greater than us.
Well, I suppose in all of that, we can then contrast the original role of, say, for example, the shaman as a sort of a bridge to, a non-material, a spiritual realm for his or her people, and how that, became, more conventional established religions. And then you had priests who again they were going to be the interpreters and to explain, or to be the mediators, the access to the divine through them. But then anything meaningful in that became lost as millennia rolled by. And then you end up just with men behind curtains who, maybe like some of the Masonic brothers, really don't understand the origins of that which they're, supposedly part of, but they're either just, going along with it because it's like that's how things have always been, or maybe in some cases, when religions become cults, you then have manipulators who are, purporting to be middlemen between the material and the non-material worlds, but actually doing so just for their own gain.
Right. And, at the very core of that, we're addressing religion, but what is oftentimes forgotten is a couple of things. Number one, religion is a man-made construct, okay? Uh, where we have folks that are supposed to be representing the people before deity, okay? And they become imbued with this sense of power and authority because they're alleged to be this deity's representative. However, if you go back and you take a look at, and that's where we come up with a lot of this institutional dogma, that you're supposed to do this or you're not supposed to do that. But at the end of the day, we have to remember, number one, that religion is a man-made institution, and that man is fallible. Man is inherently fallible. With that in mind, how can any man, regardless of whom he may be, actually represent God before other men when he himself is fallible? It's a very tough scenario.
Well, I suppose again that's something that if there was meaning in that role in the past, that was lost over time. And I've asked questions of not just theologians but priests, and they have very little to say about esoteric matters, about any type of mysticism, about non-material realms, about any of the sorts of questions that you might have asked in your lifetime. They did very little to say about it at all. It's just the really people who go through ritualistic motions on a Sunday or whatever day is the day of their religion, and without understanding, even the symbolism of it is lost on many of them.
Right. And then this is where I see hypocrisy. In other words, and okay, no disrespect to the church, okay, but the church is very anti-magic, very anti-occult. They assign a negative connotation to the word occult or esoteric. And folks, they hear those words and they become afraid. Oh, these are bad things. It has to do with witchcraft and all that sort of thing. Well, if you really look at what the meaning of the word occult means, it's nothing more than that which is hidden. And we can find the Latin root word oculus, in a lot of things. So, it's a matter of manipulation of the hearts and minds. It's disinformation, inappropriate influence. But again, it's hypocrisy in that they say, okay, magic, for example, equates to witchcraft, and witchcraft has a bad connotation because it's not understood. But at the same time, they're not acknowledging the idea that when you go to a church service, regardless of which religion it is, they are actually practicing forms of high magic. As you mentioned, rituals. Rituals are done because they have a magical aspect to them. So, in that regard, it's hypocrisy, both in the dogma and in the actual practices that are occurring. It's pretty much do as I say and not as I do.
Well, even astronomers will use the word if they're looking at one celestial object that's currently cannot be viewed because it was obscured by another celestial object, they will say that one is being occulted by the other. That standard, as you say, just simply means that. You mentioned Freemasonry, and that's something that a number of men in my family in the past were Freemasons. It was not something that I ever came any closer to than that, but it seems that it's something that, well, certainly in my grandfather's case, that he gravitated towards as a reaction against conventional religion. But it was a way of perhaps, again, seeking something, feeling there was some kind of higher power, acknowledging that and saying, well, what is it? How do I explore this? How can I move myself closer to an understanding of what this might be? It occurs to me like the three sort of fundamental questions that I have as a tagline of legalizefreedom.com is, why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? And I've had conversations with people like Mark Stavish and John Michael Greer about Freemasonry. And they've said again that a lot of lodges are, social clubs, dining clubs or whatever, and that, yes, they have these, the rites and the different degrees and whatnot and ceremonies and, but in some cases, pseudo explanations for all this, and that there seemed to be not that much interest in these deeper questions. Again, it's something that maybe even like in a mainstream religious way is kind of become lost in some ways. And I mean, even in one of John Michael Greer's recent books, he was talking about, the word having been lost in Masonry.
I would agree with your thoughts regarding your grandfather and with, of course, Mark Stavish, and I think Tobias Churton has touched on this as well. Yeah, Masonry as a fraternity, as an organization, I think it's undergone change, especially within like the last 100 years or so. Uh, if we look back to the late 1800s or the early 1900s, actually the mid 1800s, we see there was a great deal of esoteric and occultist thought. And that's exemplified in the quantity and the quality of the publications that came out of that time. As we moved forward to the late 50s, early 60s, we see that there was a dissipation in that. You don't see the quantity and you don't see the quality of the Masonic writings anymore. They begin to, what's the word I'm seeking here? They're just not, it's just not there. And in concert with that, we see that the membership within the fraternity also begins to dwindle. And at first, it wasn't that great, but in the last few decades, it's been quite precipitous. And I'm going to estimate somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 1 or 2% per year. The average age of Masons is roughly late 60s to early 70s. So that means that, and they're not replacing those who are dying, the brothers that are dying, with new members that are much younger to continue to perpetuate the fraternity. So that becomes an issue. And then for some reason, they're entrenched in certain ways of thinking, and they don't really like to have questions asked because, as you mentioned, the secrets appear to have been lost. But it's not that the secrets have been lost, it's that the interest in the occult or the esoteric aspects of it, that knowledge base has waned. Not that it's completely lost. There are still many of us who continue to pursue, asking those questions. But the real challenge, I guess, is that, or the not challenge, but the rationale behind Masonry in contrast to any religious not collaboration, but religious ideas, is that many folks want to become Masons, and it's not because of any secrets the Masons may have. They really don't have any secrets. It's the idea that in times past, you go back many, many years, it's the idea of being able to ask questions and to seek this knowledge that the church or religion in general isn't comfortable with. Religions don't ask like it when folks begin to ask questions. And that's where we begin looking at heresy. Heresy is a heretic is someone who dares to ask questions that don't conform with an institution's dogma. That makes them very uncomfortable because they may be hiding something, or there might be some knowledge there that they don't want everyone to know. So Masons, they're seeking knowledge, and they dare to ask the questions that perhaps a religion of whatever type you choose may not be comfortable in discussing or addressing. So that, in my understanding, my estimation, that's one thing that would encourage someone that has questions to look at the Masons. It's not that they're anti-religious or anything of that nature. It's they're looking for a group of fellow like-minded thinkers that are willing to explore and ask the questions that are difficult and perhaps uncomfortable.
Well, it's not like many people, walk up to you and introduce themselves and say, hi, my name's John, I'm a Mason. But the youngest Freemason that I know is in his late 50s. When I met this guy and found out that he was a brother, it coincided with a campaign. It seemed to be quite short-lived, but I certainly noticed it. Now, whether it was targeted at me for any reasons, any algorithmic sort of reason, I do not know. But it was basically a local area, Masonic lodges, various ones. And it was an advertising campaign. And it essentially said, I'm paraphrasing now, have you considered becoming a Mason? Click here for details. Would you like to come along to a meeting and talk to us, sort of thing? And I'd never seen anything like that before.
Okay, yeah. I mean, there is certainly, how should I phrase this? They're looking to improve their membership, to hopefully engage younger folks, because they desperately need younger men in the fraternity. I mean, I've seen guys as young as 18 become Master Masons. The caveat is that because the fraternity isn't offering something that engages them, and captures their attention and retains it. Oftentimes, they're in just they get the degrees, attend a few meetings, and they find out that, well, these Masonic meetings, it's just a bunch of old people. Yeah, we have, it's a dinner club or social club, whatever, where we sit down and eat. The business meeting is just that. It's strictly business. And there's really no education and training or discussion of occult or esoteric matters. So it becomes quite boring. And before you know it, the younger people are leaving. They've got, in today's society, that has had a great impact on the membership, in that, 150 years ago, it was generally a one income family. The man went to work, he got the money, and took care of his family. And he still had time, if he was fairly affluent at least, for social engagements, a variety of different clubs. And we can see, if we look back in history 150 years ago, some of these guys were members of a number of different clubs, whether it was the Masons or the Odd Fellows or some other fraternity. Very involved socially in that regard. They had time for it, and it was just a one income family. In today's environment, though, it's not like that at all. We're looking at families that are not just, two income families where the husband and the wife work, you know. There's also, taking care of kids. It's like, geez, I don't have, a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 5 job anymore. I've got to work as many hours as my employer wants me to. I might be doing, 12-hour shifts on and off. And I really don't, my free time is limited. I don't get as much vacation or time off as they did 150 years ago. So they're really under a lot of socioeconomic and financial pressure uh, to make the best use of the time that they can. And if they're not going to benefit from participating in a fraternity such as the Masons or any other organization for that matter, then they're going to move on and invest in their time to where they are receiving a benefit, spending more time with their family if it's possible, but or maybe even taking on a third job if it's necessary. So the time is very valuable, and if it's not being optimized, if they're not deriving a benefit from the amount of time spent with these fraternities or organizations socially, if they're not receiving the education or the knowledge that they were hoping to derive from it, they're going to very quickly leave. They can't afford the time to spend on something for which they're not going to receive a positive return on their investment.
Well, three thoughts on that. You've been talking about Freemasonry in general, but my thoughts could equally be widened to take into, interest in information, in knowledge, in questions, any of which that are beyond a mundane and everyday material world, just worldly concerns and just getting by day to day. First one was, well, my grandfather didn't speak about when he went to lodge meetings. That's understandable. Wouldn't expect him to. But from the sort of vibe that I got, he also played golf. And that was one thing I did get involved with because I played, I started to play golf when I was a child. He taught me, and I'd go along when I was very young with him. And at the end of golf, he would go into the members club. And at this time, it seems laughable now, but of course, women could become members of the club, but there was a separate lounge for them. So there was a gentleman's lounge where they could go in and drink and smoke and have a meal. And I would go in there. And that seemed to me be very much about, what the similar vibe to what he seemed to derive from the lodge meetings was it was networking, and it was, it was brotherhood, and it was man time, and you could talk about serious questions. You could talk about things that you wouldn't talk about anywhere else. Let's put it that way. Amidst all the brandy and the cigar smoke, and we sat there with my glass of lemonade. But I've got strong memories of that. Two other things. One is the idea of social connection, of, clubs or whatever the modern form of that would be. We're living in this hyper-connected world now, more connected than ever, apparently. But we saw during the pandemic period how disconnected we really are in many ways. And of course, for many people, their social circle now has dwindled. Their actual social circle has dwindled, and a lot of it's virtual now. And for some of the reasons you mentioned, people don't have time to maybe cultivate real world contacts, to go out in an evening or on a weekend and do things, with different interest areas or with other groups, whatever it happens to be. And this applies to women and men, of course, and then there's the other thing, thinking about younger men. coming into Masonry. And if you do have these young men that are interested, in the bigger questions of life, the universe, and everything, lodges are missing a trick if they don't try and engage with them, or if there aren't other older members there who are interested in those things, because there's so many young people now, men and women, we're suffering from low motivation, short attention spans. Again, they've been living in an online world of constant change and no real focus on anything.
Well, sure. And I think those are very good points, very good thoughts, and quite germane to what we're discussing here. Um, and I can relate to it personally because my father was a great golfer. And one of the things I learned growing up, associating him as he went around to the different courses and he was golfing, he actually conducted most of his business out on the golf course. Okay. More business was done on the golf course, especially at the 19th hole, than perhaps anywhere else. But that held true in times past for Masonry as well. Uh, Masons at one point, it's like, okay, if you're a Mason, if you're a brother, you come to lodge. And once we have our meeting, and that's over and we're sitting down, we're having dinner or whatever, yeah, you don't generally discuss politics or anything. That was pretty much off the table. But with regards to having business dealings, yeah, they made a point of helping one another out. And having that personal one-on-one interaction, I think, was very important. That, as you noted, in today's virtual world, it just isn't there. We can't sit down at a table, at a social event necessarily, and have an intelligent discourse or an exchange of thoughts and ideas, discuss, business, because, okay, you and I are both brothers. And as brothers, I have an obligation to support you as much as you have an obligation to support me. So we will do business together more comfortably because we have this commonality than someone I don't know that may have the same sort of business or service offered, that I'm not familiar with. It's a matter of trust. And I think that's one of the things that the virtual world has lost contact with, is the trust idea. Because we're not having that personal interaction, we don't necessarily trust who we're dealing with. That's something that the fraternity and many organizations, including golf activities, had offered that seemed to be fading. And I don't know if that's a fair assessment or not. But along that line, we were also discussing various opportunities. And if we go back to, I think it's like 2004, 2005, there were two movies that came out that really highlighted Masonry and the Knights Templar. And that would have been Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. And then there was National Treasure. There was a tremendous amount of interest in the Masons and in the Templars that evolved from those two movies. But sadly, the fraternity failed to capitalize on that. Younger folks were very interested, and they would come and they say, okay, I'm interested in the Masons or the Templars, and I want to learn the secrets of all this, that, and the other thing. And you've got the older brothers who are very entrenched in their ways of doing things. They're out of touch with the modern ways of thinking and engaging and capturing a younger audience because they don't know how. So what's their response to a younger person who is asking these questions is that, oh, well, Masonry is not a secret society, it's a society of secrets. If you want to learn the secrets, you have to become a member. Well, that in it of itself, that kind of discouraged some of the younger folks. But then, yeah, you did have some younger folks that set that aside, and they wanted to learn the secrets of masonry, so they would join anyway if they were qualified, only to find out that these older members just didn't know the secrets. And the reason for that, it goes back to what we were discussing before, is that not just the interest, but the knowledge of, the ancient mystical schools, the occult, understanding really how allegory functions within the rituals and the lectures. It just wasn't there. The only thing they have to fall back on are biblical quotations, their, interpretations, and, various philosophies that are existential, dealing with human nature. And for a younger person, again, that's not going to, capture, engage them, captivate their attention, when their time is so valuable, socioeconomically, financially. They just don't have time to waste on that. They're going to move on. And in conjunction with that, over the years, it didn't used to be that terribly expensive to, well, let me digress for a moment. Dues didn't used to be terribly expensive to become a Mason or a member of a lodge. But with the Grand Lodge system and the way it's evolved, there is a great burden on the subordinate lodges to support the Grand Lodge financially. And as such, the dues have gone up considerably to where, a younger person in these economic times has to make a decision. Can I afford $100 or $200 a year, to be a member of this when I'm really not getting anything out of it? Or can I take that $100 or $200 or whatever and maybe take my wife or my family out to dinner, put it towards going on a vacation? So, there's that financial impact that they also have to consider, in addition to, what the return on the investment of their time is providing them.
Okay, so let's change tack and talk about symbolism. That concludes part 1 of our interview. Part 2 will be available soon in the subscribers area at legalizefreedom.com.
legalizefreedom.com